And this topic is transporting animals. It's topic 9, and the first thing we're going to talk about is 9.1, transporting animals. It's a subtopic. Objectives. Objective 1 is we need to describe the circulatory system. I'm going to call the circulatory system CS for short. We've got to describe that circulatory system with vessels, a pump, and valves for one direction of flow. The second objective, we need to talk about the single circulatory system of a fish, then the double circulatory system of a mammal, and then the advantages of a double circulatory system. The first thing you've got in the circulatory system is the heart, which is the pump, pumps the blood around. The blood vessels are like the tubes that the blood travels in and around. Arteries go from the heart. Arterioles are like smaller versions of the arteries, and they go from arteries to capillaries. Capillaries are used for exchange between the blood vessels and the cells that need the contents of the blood, like oxygen for respiration. After the capillaries, it's done that exchange. It will then need to make its way back to the heart. Through this, it will go through venules, which are like subveins, and then these will join up into larger veins on the way back to the heart. The main thing is arteries come from the heart, capillaries are for exchange, and then veins are back to the heart. Okay, so the exchange substances that we need to talk about are CO2 and oxygen. Water also is exchange, waste, and glucose, and this is between capillaries and body cells. The lungs is a site of exchange, so in the lungs you will find a lot of capillaries, because capillaries are used for exchange, and it will be between the organ, the lung, and the capillaries. Oxygen is absorbed from the air because we need it for respiration, and then CO2 is released, and that's for mammals. But with fish, they have gills, and oxygen is absorbed from the oxygen dissolved in water as it rushes through the gills, and then CO2 is released and dissolves into the water, and that's for fish. Valves are in veins and in the heart, and they prevent backflow. They ensure a one-way flow. So the heart, the vessels, and the valves are the things you need to know about. Now, regarding the fish, the heart only has 2 chambers, which is slightly different to the mammal. It's one atrium, which collects the blood, and one ventricle that rejects the blood. So it comes into the atrium and out of the ventricle. Now, this is just a little image of the single circulatory system of a fish. The blood goes into the atrium, which is part of the heart, and then is pushed through to the ventricle. This indicates a valve which stops backflow. There's a valve right there in the heart. So it will pass through the ventricle, out of the heart to the gills. The gills has capillaries. Pressure is reduced here. Oxygen is absorbed from dissolved oxygen in water, and CO2 is given out to the water. This oxygenated blood then travels to the other capillaries of the body, not just here, but all over the fish for respiration, and then the blood will become deoxygenated and make its way back to the heart. Deoxygenated blood will carry CO2 to then transfer to the lungs to get rid of it. There will also be valves in this part here, because this is a vein leading back to the heart, but you usually don't get valves in arteries leading to the body. Single circulation means that it goes through the heart once for each complete circuit of the body. The problem with the single circulatory system of a fish is that basically the blood loses pressure when it goes through the capillaries of the gills. A general rule with capillaries is they reduce the pressure of the blood. That's why arteries have a lot higher pressure than the veins, because it goes arteries, then capillaries, where they lose the pressure, and then veins. That's why if you cut an artery in your body, you're going to bleed a lot and bleed out, and you'll struggle to repair the damage. But if you just cut a vein or a capillary, the pressure's not that intense and the blood doesn't rush out as quickly, so it's manageable. Low pressure is fine for a fish though, because the fish doesn't have that many organs where pressure is required. But in a mammal, it needs high pressure for organs such as the kidneys. Now, the kidneys you don't need to know yet, but they do a process called filtration, ultrafiltration, and that's where substances are pushed out from the liquid of the blood into the kidneys to be filtered, and then some are pushed back into the blood. They need high pressure for that. If the pressure is too low, then that's not going to happen, and all the poison that's in the blood is going to stay in the blood, and it won't be filtered out. So low pressure for a fish is fine, but not okay for a mammal. A mammal needs double circulatory. So we've got to talk about the double circulatory system of a mammal now, and it's a little different because there's two sides of the heart. Let's start here at the pulmonary vein. Now veins are where blood goes back to the heart, so the blood comes in here. It comes through this vein, which is a blood vessel, at reasonably low pressure. It fills the atrium. It fills the atrium. This is the left atrium. Notice that the left is wrong to the right because you're looking at the heart as if it was your own. So the left and the right swap around. So pulmonary vein to the left atrium. The blood fills here, and some will trickle down here into the left ventricle. When the left atrium contracts, which it does because this is a muscle here, all this red stuff is a muscle, it pushes the rest of the blood down into the left ventricle through the AV valve. Now this AV valve is to prevent backflow, and it's called the bicuspid valve as well. So AV valve, atrium, ventricle, AV valve, or bicuspid valve. These are the two names that valve has got. Once the blood is pooled in the left ventricle has a larger muscle, not very well identified on this picture, but it has a much larger muscle than any of these other three chambers. Now, because it's got the larger muscle, it contracts with a larger force. The blood is then pushed through, and it's hard to see on this diagram, but it travels straight up, not back into here because this valve will be closed, but straight up into this aorta here, which is an artery, and will travel all the way to the body, to all parts of the body. That's why it splits off into different tubes there, because it will split off into arterioles and go to upper and lower parts of the body. Once it's traveled all the way around the body, it will then come back through the vena cava. Now, the superior vena cava has blood coming back from the top of the body, and the inferior vena cava has blood coming back from the lower parts of the body. It all comes back into the right atrium now. That's where the blood will pool. And again, it will start to pool here and fill up at low pressure, and then start to trickle through here into the right ventricle through the AV valve. Again, this is an atrioventricular valve because it's between the atrium and ventricle. But it's also called the tricuspid valve. The difference between the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve is that this has got three flaps that allow it to function, but this has only got two: bicuspid, tricuspid. As the right ventricle contracts, it pushes the blood through into the pulmonary artery, which is just here. So it pushes the blood here. It can't go back up here because this valve will be closed and it prevents backflow. It pushes it through here into the pulmonary artery. Now, pulmonary relates to lungs. So we know that this is an artery, so it leaves the heart, and it's pulmonary, so it's going to the lungs. Now, there's two directions, and that's because it's got to go to the right lung this way and to the left lung. Notice that your heart is right between both of your lungs. The blood will then return through the pulmonary vein because pulmonary relates to the lungs. It's just gone to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. It will come back using the pulmonary vein. In here, as the blood goes to the pulmonary artery, and as the blood here goes to the aorta, there are two more sets of valves here. So there's two valves here, AV valves, and then there's two valves here going to the aorta and going to the pulmonary artery. These valves are called SL valves, or semilunar valves, or this one is called a pulmonary valve because it goes to the pulmonary artery, and this one is called an aortic valve, which goes to the aorta. This basically describes what we've talked about there. So I'm not going to go through that in too much detail, but do have a read of it because it does have a lot more detail than we have discussed. Okay, so this is another diagram of the heart. Again, I want to show you some different diagrams because I don't know which one you'll get in the exam. So I want you to be able to see some different examples. Now, The pulmonary veins here from the lungs supply blood into the left atrium. This will then pool into the left ventricle, and you can see the bicuspid valve there that's open, that's allowing that blood through. When the ventricle contracts, as you can see on here, this is contracted, so this space in here has got a lot smaller because the muscles here are contracted. It pushes the blood through here, okay, and you can see it travels all the way behind this one and through here into the main aorta vessel. So you can see here a bit more clearly the semilunar valve. And the same on this side, the blood comes in through the vena cava into the right atrium and then down into the right ventricle. And when the right ventricle here contracts, the blood is pushed through this semilunar valve into the pulmonary artery. Notice again that this valve is now shut. The AV valve, the tricuspid valve, is shut. So blood has only one direction to go in, and that's through the semilunar valve. Words here relate to whether the blood is filling and whether the blood is pumping. When it's filling, the blood will leak into the left atrium and then down to the left ventricle, and the same on this side from the into the right atrium and then the right ventricle. And then during systole, when it contracts, the blood is pumped out of the heart into the arteries. Now, oxygenated blood, again, is just blood with oxygen. It travels from the lungs to the heart, then to the body. Because we need the oxygenated blood for respiration, it's carried in arteries and the pulmonary vein. What I mean by that is oxygenated blood is always carried in arteries because the arteries go to the body. But the pulmonary vein comes from the lungs. So that is the only exception. The pulmonary vein is the only exception, and that carries oxygen to the heart to be pumped then into the arteries to the body. Deoxygenated blood has low oxygen concentration but high carbon dioxide concentration. Essentially blood with no oxygen. It travels from the body to the heart and then to the lungs. Now, deoxygenated blood is always carried in veins, apart from the pulmonary artery, because this is the one that goes to the lungs, and deoxygenated needs to go to the lungs to be reoxygenated. So the rule is oxygenated for arteries and deoxygenated for veins, apart from the pulmonary vessels. That's the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary artery. They're opposites. The double circulatory system, it travels through the heart twice every circuit. One circuit, it's the heart and lungs, which is the pulmonary circulation. Again, pulmonary vein, pulmonary artery. And then the second circuit is the heart and body, and that's the systemic circulation. So the benefits of the double circulatory system is that the blood basically travels at higher pressure because it's repressurized by the heart twice, because it's going through the heart twice. It separates oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, which is a good thing because you don't want deoxygenated blood going to cells that need to respire. So that increases the efficiency of transporting oxygen. So that's always helpful. Also, more blood can be transported to the body because you can transfer it under higher pressure, therefore more of it flows. You can send blood further because there's a higher pressure. And you can exchange substances like oxygen and CO2 more quickly. So respiration levels can be high, for example, during exercise. This is just a picture to show you the full circulatory system. It's quite a good diagram actually because it shows both the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. Here you have the left atrium, the valves, and the left ventricle. Then the blood will travel through here, miss all this stuff, and go into this aorta here, travel through arterioles, and then these are a capillary network. All the oxygen is lost, well, most of the oxygen is lost to body cells, and the blood becomes deoxygenated, travels here to the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava into the right atrium, then down to the right ventricle, then through this valve here into the pulmonary artery. This is the pulmonary circuit, through the pulmonary artery to arterioles, to the lungs, where the blood is reoxygenated, and so on and so forth. Again, another diagram here. This is just to show how the blood goes to certain organs. So from the heart, this is the pulmonary vein coming from the lungs back into the heart. And then this is the aorta. Now the aorta splits to go up towards organs at the top of the body, and then down towards organs at the bottom. Remember that the liver had a hepatic portal vein. This is it here. Goes from the gut to the liver, and we'll talk about that later on. The blue ones are all deoxygenated, and the red ones are all oxygenated. These are all veins, and apart from this one here, because this is the pulmonary artery and this is the exception, and then the red ones are all oxygenated and they're all arteries apart from this one, which is the pulmonary vein, and that's the exception.